Paul Hudrick is here for Inside the Sixers. The second half schedule just came out, and we will touch on that because there's a stretch in there where they're going to be on the road for about 8 weeks, it seems like. We'll get the latest from Paul from last night, get his take on that. And, of course, the Sports Bash this hour is brought to you by our friends over at Matt Blatt Nissan. The all-new Matt Blatt Nissan is now open. Black Horse Bike EHG next to Home Depot online. MattBlattNissan.com. All right, Paul Hudrick is in the house as the Sixers finally end that losing streak. Now, let me ask you, if you win a game at Tampa against Toronto, does it really count as snapping the losing streak?
Well, Raptors fans do not want you to think that is the case. They want to keep that streak alive. I mean, come on. They beat them in Toronto in the playoffs. I mean, come on. Like, let's all just – they beat Toronto. They beat the Raptors on the road. It's not the Sixers' home. They're on the road. I count it.
There we go. Well, what was different about that game last night? I mean, did you see an adjustment? What was something that kind of stood out? Or was it just simply no adjustment? They did what they did. Sixers execute. I mean, they had 45% from three.
Yeah, that's the biggest thing is and they, to their credit, that is what they said. They said, listen, Tobias Harris said, we will take those looks every single night. And they made good on that, including him. They shot the ball much, much better. I would say, as far as like maybe strategy, maybe not strategy, but defensively, I thought they upped it a notch compared to Sunday. I thought they weren't bad on Sunday, but I thought they were excellent last night. Individually, I thought guys really did a really good job of, not allowing much dribble penetration. Most of Toronto's points, I felt like, came off the Sixers turnovers and them getting points in transition. I felt that's where they got hurt the most. But I thought defensively overall in the night, they were excellent. And of course, yeah, just making your good looks helps. Korkmaz got really hot early. That was a huge boost. They needed that. Shake Milton hit a couple of huge shots late, as did Tobias Harris. So I think I don't necessarily see anything strategically. I just think they hit shots and they played just better defense.
Yeah, you made 17 threes and you hit 45%. You're going to win most of your games. I hate when it sounds that simple sometimes, Paul, but that's what the games become. Who shoots more threes, who makes more threes, and then late in the game, if the game's close, there might be a possession that comes in play. But really, I looked at the game Sunday night. They hit, the Sixers couldn't hit the broadside of a barn. If they win by 7, Toronto does. If they miss 3 threes, you win that game. Last night, the Sixers don't make 17. They only make 14, and Toronto wins. And I know it's like, well, they did make the 3. But the difference is, Philly shot 45%. Because if they don't shoot 45% last night, they lose that game.
Well, defense matters, too, because I think Toronto only shot the ball in general like around 40%. The Sixers weren't much better from the field overall. But, yeah, they hit threes. They hit open looks. But I would say the Sixers did a really good job. They didn't let Chris Boucher take 5 of them and make them. I think Ben Simmons actually blocked one late in the game. Finally, they got a hand in his face. So, I mean, it's just the little things that you're right. It's little things that can swing a game. And one of those things is 3-point shooting. So the Sixers, again, they capitalized when Shake Milton had a couple open looks towards the end of the game. He hit them. When Ben Simmons makes that incredible pass out to Tobias Harris, top of the key, they hit him. And I think one thing we're kind of losing sight of, and listen, it was an ugly game. There's no sugarcoating. It was an ugly game. It was not fun to watch, but Sixers kind of led wire to wire. I mean, I think the Raptors led it 8-7, and from there on out, the Sixers had almost a double-digit lead through most of the game. At the end, it gets weird and sloppy because Toronto starts committing fouls and pressing. Danny Green makes a really, really inadvisable cross-court pass and kind of keeps the game alive, but overall, I thought the Sixers really controlled that game. And again, on the defensive end of the floor, yes, hitting shots was huge, but the defensive end of the floor is where I thought they really took that game over and really won that game.
I want you to comment on Paul's comment. He's watching on YouTube. He says, why does Joel Embiid look so out of whack these 2 Toronto games? Are we concerned that this could be, it's a copycat? Hey, look what they're doing. Let's start to do this. Are we going to see more teams throwing the house at Joel?
Well, first of all, yes. I think any decent NBA coach will just do that strategy of let's just take the ball out of Joel Embiid's hands and make literally anybody else beat us. But here's the thing. Toronto's been doing this. Nick Nurse has been deploying this strategy, and it has worked very well. The rest of the NBA's seen it, and they haven't been able to do it. So it's not just, yes, a ton of credit goes to Nick Nurse for the scheme and for, again, for making that the strategy of let's take the ball out of his hands. But I would say, first of all, that it's it's a copycat league, but you have to have the personnel and you have to have the discipline to be able to do it. And no other team has, at least not to the degree that Toronto has over the years. And then secondly, I'd say, again, for most of that game, the Sixers were up pretty comfortably. So yes, the strategy worked because Joel Embiid didn't play well offensively, I should say, didn't shoot the ball particularly well. But the Sixers were in control for most of that game. So yes, they took Joel Embiid away, but the rest of the team still won the game.
Yeah.
So it's a matter of, yes, I do expect teams to continue to do this, but it's going to be up to Tobias Harris. It's going to be up to Ben Simmons. Those guys are going to have to hit shots. They're going to have to create offense. And with that said, I think one thing I think that game does expose, and what these 2 games Toronto does expose, is still a need for another shot creator. I still think they need that, and that those 2 games in Toronto, or excuse me, in Tampa, really showed you that that's what they need.
Yeah, and look, we'll get to that in just a second. I want to get to Tony's comment. He says, casual fans, they don't recognize Simmons and how he affects the game. I thought last night he had a terrific game. His numbers weren't like 25, I mean, he did a lot of the other things, but 15. But, man, it's just the extra patience that he shows. He gives Tobias these extra looks. Korkmaz, I mean, my God, early in the game, he's wide open. And I don't think people watch the game thinking that a lot of that is predicated on Ben's patience.
And listen, I think it's a matter of, and this is how I've always looked at Ben Simmons, and he's said something to this regard, and so has Elton Brand when we talked to him in years past. Ben Simmons is always looking for the best play. Whatever play that is, he's looking for the best play for the offense. Now, he knew Toronto's strategy the other night, get the ball out of Joel Embiid's hands, so he knows, okay, we got to find shooters. I got to find guys who are open. He found Korkmaz. Korkmaz was hot. Keep getting the ball to Korkmaz. Late in the game, he, like you said, he finds Tobias for that big shot. I think what Ben Simmons does, and I think what makes him great, what makes him special, is that he just has a feel for what his team needs. Like in the Utah game, of course, I'm sure he didn't go in thinking I'm going to score 42 points, but he knew, hey, Joel Embiid is out. I need to pick up the scoring slack, and I need to make that happen. And I think, in general, I think he's always been like that, where he's always looked for the high percentage play, always looked for the best play for the team. I think recently he started to realize that sometimes that the best play is for him to score. And I think that is what is kind of added an extra element. And I think that is what has made him extra dangerous recently, and what's made the Sixers better. Now, defensively, I thought that's, again, you talk about the defense, I thought that's where he was tremendous last night, really controlled the game. I mean, he's guarding Fred VanVleet and Pascal Siakam.
Late, too.
Yeah, exactly. And like both guys. And like there were plays. Think about how good Ben Simmons and Joel Embiid were defensively. They were switching on Pascal Siakam. Think about how nuts that is and how many teams can do that, where your center and your point guard are switching on the same player and you feel comfortable with that matchup. It's crazy how good both of those guys are defensively. And for Ben Simmons, like I really I'm going to push the campaign for him. I think he should be, like, at least through these, 30 plus games, he should be the defensive player of the year. He has been that good.
Yeah. Last night I said, if you just zoned in and watched him, ball's coming off, he's running from the backcourt back into the front court, tipping the ball to keep it alive. I mean, he's making a bucket, or he gives a little dish to Tobias. Tobias makes it, and then he's sprinting back the other way. I mean, it's just like these little energy things that he is just added, that have stuck out for whatever reason. They've stuck out more this year. Dan says, I think the window is now for this Sixers team. How much longer will Embiid play at this level? So this kind of gets into your conversation. I think it's a good one to have with you, Paul. Says, I feel like they need to do whatever it takes to land another star. Levine, Lowry, etc. What do you guys think? Now, obviously, the trade-off is, as we mentioned, you bring in Lowry, you're going to lose probably 2 to 3 players. So if you are a team right now that can maybe beat Brooklyn because of your defense, or you bring in a player like Lowry, do you think you can outscore them if you go that route, or do you stay with what you have and say, let's see if our defense can hold you down, or do we try to say, less defense, but we'll go fire with fire? I don't know which one's a better method, but I don't know that trying to outscore Durant, Harden, and Irving is the way I'm going.
Right, and they still have to listen. Even if you don't have the firepower they have to stop you defensively. So that's the issue that they're going to have. And like DeAndre Jordan is not the guy he was in LA. He's not that same player anymore. He can still play, but he's not that guy anymore. He's not like a defensive player of the year type player anymore. Doesn't protect the rim at that level quite to the degree which he did. And I think it's not as black and white either as to say like either get Lowry or don't do it. Like even if they don't swing big and get like a Kyle Lowry or somebody of that ilk, that doesn't mean they can't improve and improve in a significant way. If you get, and I wrote that in the recent article I wrote, is that this team is not going to look like it does now. It's going to be different. They're not going to have the same look after the trade deadline going into the playoffs. It's just not going to be the case. And let's say in a perfect world, they get a George Hill from Oklahoma City. They get a PJ Tucker from Houston. And then a couple months later, not a couple months, but, a little bit when the buyouts start happening and JJ Redick hits the buyout market, you bring JJ Redick in. All of a sudden, you have Shake Milton, Matisse Thybulle, George Hill, PJ Tucker, JJ Redick. And listen, it's not about you're not going to play all those guys, but when you get into a playoff series, let's say you're not shooting the ball well. Okay, let's go to JJ Redick. Hey, this guy's really killing us offensively. Okay, let's go to Matisse Thybulle. You can mix and match these pieces, or Dwight Howard's in an unfavorable matchup. Okay, well let's put PJ Tucker at the 5 and let him go against the more of a stretch 5. It's I think that versatility and Doc having those pieces to work with to match up better can help. Or maybe you mess around, you get you mix, you get a couple bench guys. Maybe you elevate Shake Milton to the starting lineup to add a ball handler. You bring Danny Green off the bench. There are other ways. I don't think I agree with the sentiment of Joel Embiid is having an MVP type season. Ben Simmons is playing the best basketball of his career, and you could argue so is Tobias Harris. So with all of that happening, I think you could make the argument, go all in on Lowry or somebody of that ilk. But I also think that you can get really good bench pieces and still elevate this team to a really high level.
Well, and that's Chris says, I think the Sixers are perfectly fine the way they are now. When everyone's healthy and playing at their best, no one in the East will beat them. And I think what you're saying is, or maybe his comment is, with what you have and just tinkering a little bit, like last night, that bench was short. You had Scott, Joe, Howard, who am I forgetting, that played off the bench last night, Milton, and one other, and Thybulle. I mean, he played 15 minutes, so that's pretty short to go with those 5. Now, you had to put Korkmaz in the starting lineup, but I don't think you're excited about, well, they lost Korkmaz off the bench. Like, he's a guy that people want out of there anyway. So just not having Curry last night, all right, Korkmaz went in. Your bench was, I don't know that you're winning a 7-game series with that bench.
I mean, it's a tricky question because at the same time, in a playoff series, Joel Embiid's playing 40-plus minutes. Ben Simmons is playing for, Tobias Harris. They're all going to be playing big, big, big minutes. So in that regard, the bench isn't going to hurt you as much. You have, again, I think Shake Milton is a viable bench basketball player in the NBA. I think a pretty good one, especially when his shot's falling, which you saw it fall last night. And historically, he's been a very good shooter. It was down a little bit before he got hurt. He's come back and looked like he's kind of maybe, if I've noticed he's maybe got a little bit more arc on his shot, which is a subtle thing, but I think that he's got like a little more legs underneath of him. I think Matisse Thybulle, from a defensive standpoint, is absolutely a NBA playoff player because of, again, when you're struggling when a particular wing or guard is hurting you, to be able to go to a guy like that can lock somebody down is huge. And then Dwight Howard, listen, stretch 5s are going to hurt him in the playoffs. There's no doubt about that. They're going to have to remedy that, I think, in some way. But when you have maybe like a more plotting big guy, or, like the Nets, if you're a DeAndre Jordan, when you're going up against them, Dwight Howard's a good guy to have so that he's competing on the offensive boards and making sure the other team's not killing you on the offensive board. So I think they have some playoff pieces, but I do think, again, a shot creator would be big, some type of point guard ball handler to help out, and then some type of stretch 5. I think those are the 2 biggest needs. And again, it's not because you want to play all of those guys. It's because you want to be able to mix and match. You want to be able to match up with other teams in the playoffs because that's the name of the game.
Yeah.
In a series, you have to play that chess match and match up.
All right. I know this might sound like preposterous, but would you have any interest in Boogie Cousins as a backup stretch 4 for Tobias to play 12 minutes?
Not really.
No.
Just because he can't move anymore.
Yeah, no, he's tough sometimes.
Yeah, and listen, I think that that's not to say that I don't think he could be valuable for another team, because I think he can be, because he can shoot the bat. He's got really good touch. He can shoot the
Yeah.
basket pretty well. He's got good passing instincts. He's a pretty damn good passer for a big. Can kind of play that like point center role. But I think when you already have Dwight Howard, I don't know if I like that. I'm looking for more of like a Chris Boucher type,
Yeah.
a guy who's long, can block shots, but then can also step out and knock down a three. That's the kind of guy I'm looking for. So I don't dislike the idea of Boogie Cousins, but I don't know how it would work here. And I also think that he would probably have a better opportunity to go somewhere else and be assured backup 5 minutes.
Now, somebody asked, do you think that Maxey could turn into that guy? I don't know if he could turn into the guy, but I guess the question that I want to ask off Derek's question is Maxey, would you deem him like an untouchable trade piece because of what he can become? Or do you say, I can't worry about that. I'm willing to put him as part of something to try to get a veteran in here now? Or are you worried that if I give up on him, I'm losing a guy who 2 years from now is going to be torturing me?
I think there's a big gray area there, because I do still think he could be really, really good. He's 20 years old. He's got to get stronger. He's got to shoot better. But I think the tools are there. I think he works really hard. So I think the shot's going to come around. It's not broken by any stretch. And we've talked, a ton about his floater game and that little mid-range game he has, which is really, really good. I love how he uses ball screens. Again, for a rookie, for a 20-year-old guy, it's really impressive, especially when you consider, the draft process these guys all had to go through this year and the truncated training camp these guys had to kind of assimilate with their NBA teams. It's impressive that he was even able to crack into the rotation, because I wasn't sure if that was going to happen. With that said, it would have to be the right deal, but no, I wouldn't say he's untouchable by any means. If you
Is Lowry the right deal? Would you do a Green and I assume, Paul, that it's got to be Green, and then I'm assuming it's got to have to be either Thibault, Maxey, or Milton would be one of the three guys that someone else is going to ask for. They're not going to say, yeah, give me Mike Scott and Korkmaz and Green, and I'll give you a Lowry. Like, they're going to want one of your younger players to give up, even, to give that up.
Well, specifically with Lowry, I can tell you that I've worked that NBA trade machine to death, and the only way you make the money work is Mike Scott, Danny Green, Tony Bradley, and Terrence Ferguson. That's the only way you make that money work. If you swap any one of those guys out with Thibault, with Milton, with Maxey, the money doesn't work. It's just not enough. So you need to put all four of those guys in a trade.
Team
so
is what you need.
Yeah, so that means you are going to have to include draft compensation. So you're talking, and then it's at that point, the Raptors are in a really good position of, again, just talking about Lowry specifically, the Raptors have all the leverage. They are right in the thick of things in the Eastern Conference. There's rumors they've been looking at Andre Drummond possibly. Yes, Lowry's in the last year of his deal and he's 35 years old, but they have no real big motivation to trade him. It's very conceivable that he could sign right back with them this offseason and finish out his career in Toronto. He loves it there. He's an icon there. He won a championship there. So they hold all the leverage. So is it a first-round pick they want? Is it multiple first-round picks? Is it some combination of first and second round? It would depend on what it is.
Yeah.
But just getting back to Maxey, I mean, it would have to be a difference-making player for me to include Maxey. Like when it was, when James Harden, when those talks were and Maxey was in there, I said, okay, yeah, I think you have to do it to get a guy like James Harden. Again, if Bradley Beal, I don't expect Bradley Beal to hit the market, but if he does, if Washington says we want Maxey, you don't think about it because Bradley Beal's that good. Every team's got to have a walking away point.
For Beal, Maxey can't be the centerpiece. You're going to have to go higher than him, right?
It's going to be mostly draft picks, I would think, because you're not. Listen, I don't think Washington would have much interest in Ben Simmons just because they still have Westbrook under contract, and I don't see how on earth that could possibly work out. So I would think it would be and again, I don't think it's happening before this trade line, maybe more in the offseason. It's going to be like similar to what the Nets did for Harden, where it's going to be a lot of draft picks and pick swaps in order to get that done. But yeah, it's got to be, to me, just with Maxey or, with any of the young guys, it's got to be a special player I am getting in return for me to pull the trigger.
Good conversation. As The trade deadline is what, the 29th?
Fifth.
25th. Okay, so we got about it's about a month left to go. The second half of the season schedule just came out, and as you chronicled at Paul Hudrick on Twitter, they have a road trip coming up that man, you could grow that beard by the time they get home.
Yeah, and it's not even just it's the road trip. So it's 6 games. 4 of them are West Coast games against good West Coast teams, including the Lakers and the Clippers. They come home for a back-to-back, and then they go right back on the road, and they're at Boston, at New Orleans, and a back-to-back at Oklahoma City, at Dallas. Then they come home and they play the Clippers and the Nets.
Yeah.
So that is like that. Like I don't think it's exaggerating to say that stretch could determine where they are in the playoff seeding. If they come out of that thing like around 500, that is a win because that is a gauntlet that they are facing. So I would say that's one of those things where if you're a Sixers fan, mentally prepare yourself because they are going to lose a good chunk of those games. It's just mathematics, like it's just numbers. Like it's just a very difficult trip. If they come out of the other side of that and they win a bunch of those games, then this team has a chance to be something special. Now a lot can change too. The trade deadline is within that. So maybe they make a big move and maybe they get a certain player that really elevates them. But that could also lead to maybe some chemistry issues. So maybe it's going to take them some time in a difficult stretch where they're going to have to develop that chemistry. So I'm just saying, Sixers fan, mentally prepare yourself for that very, very difficult stretch.
Well, and if they get through that, Paul, and they are still the number 1 seed, you might have a legit title contender.
I would 100%. That's going to me, that's going to be like, we talked, like there's been talk about like barometers and all that. And like, no, hasn't been a true barometer, true test yet. That stretch though, that will tell you an awful lot about this basketball team and where they stand and how good they can be.
All right, Paul Hudrick, great job as always. Good conversation. And Paul, this time of the year, you're going to start hearing names, Zach LaVine, Lowry. I'm sure other names are going to start entering the mix. And then the buyout market, I would imagine the Sixers are going to have a lot of interest in that if they want to try to tweak the bench. So we'll be keeping our eyes on it. At Paul Hudrick on Twitter, McCormick and Blevins all over the Sixers. By the way, Blevins got the best deal of them all. He's in Tampa. I mean, come on.
The weather.
Beautiful.
Well, hey, the weather's not too bad today. At least.
It's not.
Geez, at least the snow's melting.
I looked. It was 80 down there. It's 80 down in Tampa.
Yeah,
and
I would trade that, yeah.
He got to see the Sixers' first win in against the Raptors on the road since the Doug Collins era, other than the playoffs, as many people kept forgetting those playoff games. Brett Brown actually won a game in Toronto. How about that? The worst coach in the world was able to win in Toronto. All right, Paul.
Yeah. All right, Mike. Take care,
bud. It's Paul Hudrick inside the Sixers, and he'll be back on Friday